All views and opinions expressed in this podcast may lead to learning. All information provided is for educational and developmental purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for a growth mindset. Before taking action, please consult your motivation.
This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
Hello everyone! Today, Teacher Talking Time podcast is turning 2. I'm at a loss to express how incredible this podcast is.
The variety of topics discussed in the podcast keeps me on top of my game.
As an English teacher, the podcasts have helped me to look at education from a different perspective.
I usually listen to the podcast, make notes, and implement what I learned in my daily teaching.
But with podcasts, I can listen while I do the washing up, or while I'm cleaning the house, or, obviously while commuting.
Listening to podcasts helps me beat the feeling of professional isolation. These recorded conversations by regular and guest voices fill my professional lounge with wonderful ideas and help me stay connected.
I also encourage my colleagues to listen to you, and sometimes we gather to discuss what we learned from the interviews. Instead of having a book club, we have a podcast club.
I'd like to say, so happy kind of second birthday to Teacher Talking Time. And let's hope that you have many, many more episodes to come.
This episode of Teacher Talking Time was created with support from Podbean. As you know, podcasts are a great way to get your message out or engage within a professional or creative community. We use Podbean to host our show, and it's super effective at doing everything you'd want. If you're a beginner or seasoned podcaster, Podbean's user-friendly interface can help you start, manage, distribute, and grow your show. If you're looking to start a podcast for either professional or personal reasons, Podbean is a powerful and inexpensive option. Learn Your English has a special link for our listeners who want to try out Podbean at no risk. Learn more about their features and get your first month free when you go to podbean.com/LYE. Thanks for listening to us and for subscribing to Teacher Talking Time. Now, let's get back to the show.
Hi everyone, my name is Carrie.
What's up everyone? My name is Johan.
I'm Rocio.
My name is Azat Bostash.
This is Alex.
My name is Yasmin.
My name is Ethan.
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Angela from Columbus, Ohio.
Hi everybody, my name is Kimberly and I'm from Malawi.
Hi everyone, my name is Marek Kiczkowiak and I'm from Poland.
Hey everyone, my name is Ruiz and I'm from Ivory Coast.
I'm from Singapore, I live in Costa Rica.
Bhavna and I come from Nepal.
I'm from France.
And I'm from São Paulo, Brazil.
I'm from Huskvarna in Sweden.
From El Salvador.
From Macau.
From Vietnam.
From Korea.
And I'm from Turkey.
I'm from China.
I'm originally from Egypt. I lived in the UK and the UAE, and I'm now living in Canada. You're listening to...
And now you're listening to...
This is Teacher Talking Time.
Teacher Talking Time.
Teacher Talking Time.
Teacher Talking Time. The Learn Your English.
The Learn Your English.
The Learn Your English podcast.
And you're listening to Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
And we have some people who have joined us. So hello if you're watching on YouTube, and hello to the few of you who are here in the meeting with us. So let's just jump to it. Since you're here and we can take advantage of that. What maybe Dr. Michelle, will start with you. What does podcasting mean to you in terms of development, and how have you, we know the answer, so we'll just ask you to explain it. How have you incorporated it into your professional life, into your teaching life, and maybe even into your students' lives?
Yeah, thank you. Let me start to you guys with congratulations indeed in 2 years Learn Your English podcast, Teacher Talking Time. I think it's been really taking off already, I think, and it's good to have been part of it also a little bit. And how am I using it? I mean, maybe I should start by saying that I've always been a listener in a sense that I really like listening much more than for example, watching YouTube movies or something like that. I really like being able to listen to things. So I used to be also someone who switches on talk radio in the morning, the first thing to do.
Okay.
So listening to information is super interesting for me, or it's just also a habit. And having a busy professional life, having a family life, having loads of things to do, it's getting more and more difficult to listen to content when you want it. And I think podcasting has really been something that filled that gap. So being able to switch it on when you have time for it. So when I came first across this podcast, I think I was also hooked because your opening, or one of the opening ones, was with Patsy Lightbound, I think so, who's been one of my heroes for many years in second language acquisition research and language pedagogy. So that was great to just listen to that. And I mean, you have guests on there that have been quite important for my professional life in terms of research. That I've read their papers, but also in the sense of, also widening the horizon of people that I didn't know beforehand. So it was really also nice to open new content and get to know, new information. And as I'm teaching on a master's program of applied linguistics, I thought some of the podcasts you're using are inspirational, but also really good for students to learn from. So I started using the one with Paula Winke last year in my class on second language assessment, also as a way of introducing them to high quality information that you can listen to, so that research is not only in papers that are sometimes difficult to access, but actually you can also get some information by listening to people who know what they talk about. So I've been using that one in my teaching in the sense that I have a task-based approach, and students do get a task on writing a review of the podcast where they use quotes from the podcast that I find inspiring, and then in class we use them as a basis for discussion. So that's how I use it.
Amazing. I mean, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but podcasting has come a long way in terms of an educational tool. So all the things that you're doing, I know Leo, Mike, and I, and everyone listening, hopefully loves that. But it's I don't want to say revolutionary, but it's something that's quite new in our industry, what you're doing with it. So it's great to see, and I think that's what we're celebrating that more than 2 years of our show. We're celebrating the evolution of podcasting as a way for people to learn and learn from each other, as you suggested. And as we like to say, it makes articles and writers and everyone come alive, and it builds a community of people and anywhere that can learn from each other. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I really think I think also your students are probably quite grateful to have that opportunity, because I find graduate students in particular, they are often intimidated by this idea of becoming and getting published, and I think as you suggested, showing them the different options that are out there to share your knowledge and to celebrate what you've learned is important for your own motivation to continue this drive for lifelong learning. So I'm sure your students get just a lot from it, just for that simple fact, right? Just knowing that there are different ways for them to disseminate what they've learned and to break down that barrier of getting published and so on.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things is also that they that I think for students it's sometimes really important to know that these are real people. so the people that write papers, that that indeed they have a voice, and I mean, personally, I've also I just love the one by Jane Willis, and I think I'm using her paper, her works in so many years in my teaching, and then just being able to listen to her coming about basically in from a language teacher to researcher to such an important author in the field of task-based language teaching, and also listening in and finding out that she's such an inspiring speaker as well. I mean, that's I think really good and great for students also to see that these are not just people that write articles, but they have a story to tell.
And they like telling it. Yeah.
Yes. I was just going to say, it's surprisingly that that podcast, that episode is actually not one of our most popular episodes. Actually, Dr. Maria Michel is the #1 most listened to episode of the Teacher Talking Time podcast. But I remember doing that interview with Mike, and we were just so excited throughout the entire interview because it was such a long conversation. And I think one of the most beautiful things about podcasting, and I was talking to Mike about this before we started recording the show, is that podcasting, it's a different way. It's perhaps a more viable option for teachers, for people who are looking for non-traditional ways to develop professionally. Because normally in our field, in our industry, when people think about professional development or even personal development, they normally think about either taking courses or attending conferences and things like that. And podcasting really provides ample opportunities for people to engage in professional development, and which is somewhat affordable. And to go back to the Jane Willis episode, there was so much learning throughout that episode because we were just genuinely coming from a beginner's mindset. We just wanted to know more about the backgrounds of task-based language teaching, how she came across all the works of Prabhu, and finding out about, I think it was the background of Prabhu's work and how Prabhu didn't force the students to communicate as much. That's something that you won't find published in any paper.
Mm-hmm. And I remember being really nervously at the beginning. I think my voice even shook for the first question. And but it goes back to what you said, Dr. Michel. It's this idea that that we're reading about these people and we hold them up on such a high pedestal, and then you just learn that they're just people. But you wouldn't know that, because if all you're doing is reading what they're getting published, it leaves that kind of coldness, that barrier there. And I know that it's unintended, right? They don't mean to come across as cold researchers. It's just that's the genre, that's the vernacular. So having this other alternative platform is great. It's great for them to network with their audience as well.
Yeah. And I actually also think that what Leo was saying before in terms that attending a course or attending conferences, it's also something that people who want to engage with new content, it's really hard to fit that into your life. But I usually do it when I'm or listen to podcasts when I do the laundry. So that's typical, my 15 minutes, and I can listen to it, in the so and others can listen to it on their commute, and it's just really an excellent way of engaging with content that's exciting. And fit it into your life. And then, as said, to have all those people from all over the world that can just join and tell you what inspires them and keeps them going. I think it's really cool.
I'm a shopper. When I go to the supermarket, that's when I listen to podcasts. That's my go-to. It's funny, I don't listen to them at home, which is, I feel like what most people do. But when I used to commute back in the days of commuting, I used to listen to it on the commute, and now it's going for a walk, my afternoon walk or whatever, and going grocery shopping. Basically never at home, although sometimes, but it's kind of curious, I guess. Leo, when do you listen?
Oh, I actually have. I wanted to get into the research later, but I have, before we answer that question, Andrew, I conducted a very informal research with teachers in our Instagram page. We have about 6,000 people, 5,000, I don't know. And 98% of those people are teachers. So I asked them a bunch of questions yesterday, and I just wanted to share them with you. So one of the questions that I asked a lot of the teachers, and again, just to go back to this idea of professional development. A lot of teachers, I think, in different parts of the world, they are still under the impression that professional development means being trained. And I think it was Wallace in 1991 who wrote a book, Training Foreign Language Teachers, and he talked about this top-down approach to professional development, which basically entails the expert lecturing at the teachers, this transmissive model, which again becomes very pervasive with with PPP, which is to me an extension of this top-down approach to professional development. And what happens in this kind of approach is that teachers eventually become passive consumers of information, whereas podcasting is more what we call bottom up, because it involves reflection. It involves something, it involves a level of agency. As most of you have said, you can actually decide whether or not you want to listen to a podcast. And I think it was research by Steve Mann and Walsh who basically call this professional development in the wild. And I really like that, because it's really moving away from the boundaries of being in a classroom, developing. And as you said, Mariah, there's no opportunity most of the time for people taking a course to really engage with the information. And I was talking to a teacher recently, and she said she took a training course, and the training course took about a week. And I said, a week? And she said, yeah. And all we did was reading and producing papers and doing case studies, but there was very little engagement, very little, almost no opportunity for them to reflect, for them to design, for them to have this dialogue with regards to what they're consuming. And just to go back to the research now, to the question, so 71% of the people on our page said that they actually listen to podcasts. And then I asked them, do you find that you actually learn from podcasts? 92% have actually stated that they actually learned something from podcasts. But here's the interesting thing. And I asked them, did you know that there is a growing body of evidence suggesting that podcasting is indeed an effective way of learning and developing? And then we have a bit of a division here, with 60% saying yes and 40% saying no. So it's still somewhat relatively new to a lot of people. And the other question that I asked, do you benefit personally and professionally from listening to podcasts? And approximately 90% of the people have said that they actually have learned from podcasting. So I think there are a couple of very interesting findings for us to discuss here.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just a matter of perception, Leo. Like, it goes back to what you said earlier a little bit about how people view professional development or conceptualize it, right? Like, if you're conceptualizing it as something that you receive, then it's not surprising that you might have, say, 40% who feel that podcasting wouldn't necessarily associate with professional development. But if you take an alternative look at it and you think, okay, so as I'm listening to this podcast, I'm internally kind of constructing my own understanding. I'm relating what's being said in the podcast to my own situation. Then I'm developing, right? Or if it's like you and I, if we're working with, we're interviewing Jane Willis, and we're building that, we're constructing that dialogue as we go along, then we're building our knowledge through your ideas, through my ideas, through Jane Willis's input, and we're developing that way. So again, just I feel like it might be a matter of perception, right? If you view development one way, it might change the way you approach how you listen to podcasting. But overall, yeah, I think it's, without a doubt, there's lots of things going on as you listen to these podcasts. Even if you're shopping like Andrew, or doing the laundry.
Rarely shopping. I try not to.
Try not to, yeah. But yeah, I think because there's just to finish up, there's just a lot of reflection that goes on, and it's both internal and co-constructed in many ways. Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to add to that, Mike, before Andrew takes over and we move on to the next point here. But and I think it was same Mann and Walsh talking about this idea that bottom up development doesn't always involve listening to podcasts. It could be anything from like watching a YouTube video, or it could be reflecting on a classroom event, or writing down some of the ideas that you had, or some things that you wish you had done in your class. So I think we're still very much stuck on this idea that the only way teachers can develop is by taking courses. And I think in a lot of settings, in a lot of contexts, and I think you know which context I'm talking about, people are still very much idolizing this idea of taking training courses. And I think it was Borg, just to piggyback on what you said, Mike. Borg was the one who said that this bottom up not only encourages reflection, it is a reflective model, but he said that it really promotes this critical engagement with, as you said, Mike, with the received knowledge while developing your own understanding of your beliefs and practices. And I think all of us, I remember this in the Jane Willis episode, and even in the podcast with Mariah, and even in the one with Jason Anderson, as I'm listening, I'm able to really reconceptualize and reframe some of the ideas that I have about my own philosophy of teaching, and trying to see what fits and what doesn't fit, or whether I agree with this or whether I disagree. And sometimes I found myself rewinding parts of it and thinking, I don't know if I agree with that. So there is some sort of development happening there, but we don't, because it's not formal. It's not, we're going to school, we're taking a course. We don't perceive that as development.
Yeah, it's I don't know a lot about the concept, but this notion of ways of knowing, right? Like by doing that, you're thinking, well, what do I really know about this topic, right? And how can I demonstrate that? And maybe it is, as you suggested, hitting pause and reflecting a little bit, going back. Does that jive with what I do in the classroom? So it's really neat how you can take something like a 2-hour podcast and really break it down and to relate those different sections to your own knowledge and your own classroom situation.
And it goes both ways, I imagine, because I've never written a research paper, but I would imagine if I had 15 years ago and I was invited to talk on a podcast in 2021, likely what I wrote about has changed in the last 15 years. So I'm able to expound and to explain. And obviously there are constraints and restrictions for writing and publishing those types of papers that maybe, I'm assuming, you wouldn't have been able to get everything in that you originally wanted to. So I think, we joke that our show is a long form podcast, which it is. Lee always jokes that our webinars are 4 hours and our podcasts are 8 hours, but they can be if you want them to be, if you rewind and you really kind of taskify, if you will, listening to any show that you listen to. You can get out of it what you want. And you kind of beat me to the punch. And this is before we open the floor. There's other people here that we want to hear from and how they use podcasting in their own contexts. But Mike and Leo, we use the concept of relationships when we teach academic writing. And we do that purposefully because you have to define what the word relationship means when you write your essay, because it's such a simple word that everyone has a very superficial idea, obviously, of what that word means. But when you get down to it, well, what type of relationship are you talking about? What relationship? Between whom? And I think professional development is another one of those words where it's so pervasive and it's thrown around so much for good reason. But what does it mean and how do you define it? And I don't know that we can, other than saying you have to define it for yourself and for your own context. And I think podcasting is one tool that allows teachers and us to take from it what we need to, as opposed to what Leo talks about a lot with top down and being told or being talked at, in terms of what I can get out of it. I hope not just our show, but all ELT related podcasts allow teachers to take from it, and the experts as well, to take from it what is necessary for their own development. And that's my TED Talk.
It's a lot of interesting points there. I would like to hear from some of the people that we have here, a little bit about their own experience with podcasting. Do you find that as you are listening to a podcast, do you find yourself reflecting? Do you find yourself pausing? Do you find yourself rewinding certain things, writing things down? I remember when I listened to, because I usually listen to every episode after it goes on the platform. And I find myself really reflecting on a few key ideas and trying to expand on those ideas when I go for my own walks. So perhaps we can hear from some of the people who are here with us today. Talk a little bit about that. How do you listen to podcasts? What do you get out of it? People are very shy.
The beauty of a live show is we'll just wait and wait and wait.
I'm just gonna unmute myself.
Sure.
Hi everyone.
Hey.
Thanks so much for doing this. I think it's really cool. And first of all, congratulations on your 2-year anniversary.
Thank you.
Again, like Andrew, when we used to commute to work, when I used to commute to work, I would listen to all sorts of podcasts, not just educational ones, but entertaining ones as well. And my all-time favorite is A Way with Words. Because I have, even before I became a teacher, I've always been a word nerd. And Leo, I have always found myself sort of pausing and reflecting on. So the format of that podcast is that people call in with language questions. They call in with stuff like fights between family members about how a word is pronounced and things like that. And I've definitely paused and tried to think of how I would pronounce it, because I don't have what is called, and I'm not on video, but I'm doing the air quotes, what is called a standard English accent. So I reflect on stuff like that, especially when they come up with like idioms that are regional. I try to think of what I would say instead, or what I would say in my native language and things like that. So it is a very reflective process for me. Even when I'm listening to, entertaining stuff about books or TV shows, I'm always trying to think in the background how it relates to what I have watched or what I have read. And yeah. And when I was teaching, I had the opportunity to teach English to, not English, well, post-grad prep to English teachers or English teacher trainees. So it included, so these were Chinese teachers who were here in the US about to begin their MAT Sol. And I was entrusted with helping them sort of get used to the American way of the American classroom, I guess. So we did a lot of episode dissection of, I think it was the TEFL Institute podcast, where they talk a ton about, teaching techniques and things like that. And I definitely see myself doing that again if I had an opportunity. Very recently, as recently as last week, I listened to you guys' How to Have a Conversation episode. And I don't remember the exact title of it. And I really loved it because while we talk about these are the parts of a real conversation and this is how you do small talk, I had not heard of the 4 A's technique before. So again, that is something that I foresee myself using in the classroom.
Wonderful.
So yeah.
The A Way with Words, I've listened to that a lot too. It's one of my favorites. It's really well done. It's really interesting.
It's beautiful. Yeah. It's one of my favorites, definitely. It's right up there.
Perfect. Maybe Adiane wants to chime in?
Yes.
All right.
Actually, first of all, congratulations. I was listening to podcasts like 30 minutes ago, and it is amazing how you are so spontaneous when you are talking, how your ideas are aligned among yourselves. It is really nice. And Deepika, her name, I don't know how to say it, but yes, like she said,
Deepika,
sorry. I reflect a lot. I pause every time, and the podcasts, they have helped me not just like on my professional life, but as well in my personal life, because sometimes I wonder wow, I guess they recorded this for me. And then I always write down some reflections. I write down expressions, idiom, different vocabularies. I actually have a notebook. I write like a summary of things that I have learned while listening to the podcasts. The content are really good. I have had opportunities to learn about different authors, different topics. I also share them with my students. I encourage them to listen to the podcast. Actually, we have done some activities with 2 podcasts. The one about keeping the conversation, that they're difficult to keep moving on with the conversation we normally stall. And the other one was about visualization. We worked with these 2 podcasts and they liked it. Like Mariah said, it is real people talking, and then it is nice. They feel part of their own learning process.
How did it go with your students?
Really good. Actually, they love it. Like they said, the podcasts are good, easy to understand, the pace of the communication, even the words. They said that they could keep like following the ideas. Yeah. I don't know, because I just like love Teacher Talking Time podcast. I listen to it all the time. So that's it. I just wanted to say thank you, because honestly, it has helped me a lot. I listen to Teacher Talking Time podcast every day, and like every time a different reflection, different learning. Just for me to be here talking, it is already an improvement.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's great to hear. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a lot of interesting things there, Andrew and Mike and everyone listening to this, because when I was doing my research, I was looking into the advantages of educational podcasting. And interestingly enough, one of the main sources for my sources in the dissertation was actually one of our guests, Fernando Rosell Aguilar. And he wrote an article in 2007. I think it was called Top of the Pods. And it was a seminal paper because it was the first published paper on podcasting. And I used a lot of his ideas. I quoted him quite a lot. And then eventually Mike and I had the opportunity to interview him for the Teacher Talking Time. And I think it was right when the pandemic struck. It was like beginning of March, if I'm not mistaken.
It was, yes. Yeah.
Right. But one of the things he said, it's funny because what everyone is saying is exactly in line with what the research suggested, that podcasts have a lot of potential as language learning tools as well. They can advance learning in areas such as pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, listening, speaking, and they can also act as supplementary learning aids. And I think Mariah can talk a little bit about that with her MA students. And as some of you have said, Deepika and Ediani and other people, reducing this isolation, because teaching is a very lonely profession, because you're stuck in a classroom and you
especially
very rarely
these
have,
days.
right? You have no contact with people, and promote this sense of belonging. And I thought this was only especially the part about developing your language, because when I was doing my research, some of the people that I've interviewed for the paper, they were Brazilians or Spanish speakers, and they said that they benefited tremendously from listening to podcasts because it really improved their listening, their listening skills in general, because they said that they don't have a lot of opportunities to listen to English outside the classroom or the textbook. And I thought this was only with non-native speakers of English, but interestingly, I had 2 native speakers. One guy who was living, that I interviewed, and he lived in a very small village in Italy. He said, the podcast is the only exposure that I have to English. And he said, I was losing my English because I've been living in Italy for such a long time, and listening to the podcast really helped me with my listening skills. Not to mention the fact that, as Ediani mentioned, it really promotes this lifelong learning mindset, which is something that we're constantly talking about in our podcast. And of course, as Andrew mentioned, accessibility, flexibility, allowing multitasking. As Mariah said, she's doing her laundry, Andrew is shopping, Mike is ice skating and listening to a podcast. I'm usually going for a walk. It's just a breath of fresh air for those who seek a different kind of input that is not just written text.
And podcasting isn't new. It might be relatively new to our industry, but it's not new in general. And there's hundreds of thousands. I mean, whatever you're interested in, there's dozens on that topic that you could choose from. So it's very accessible. And yeah, I mean, obviously we're biased because we love them, but they're a great tool for sure.
And I think the accessibility goes both ways. And this to Deepika's point. Leo, surely, like in our preparation for the podcasts, like we're going through, we are researching, just so you know, like we're going through, we're getting the background information, we're finding out about alignment, we're delving deeply into task-based language teaching. But I think for the creators, and of course, if you were to create your own podcast, the creation and development side of it really helps you think about how you're going to translate your ideas to the audience. And I know, Leo, you and I you especially have been playing with the Feynman technique lately. And this goes back to Deepika's point, which was that, you know, as the audience is listening, they're kind of visualizing what we're talking about. And as creators, it's been our challenge to create the content in a way that is accessible, right? So that the audience can latch on to what we're saying, the main points of alignment, right? The main points of the task cycle. And I think that for us as kind of scholars and practitioners, it's really important that we are finding ways to talk about these complex ideas in a manner that is easily understandable, right? That translates to the classroom, and that so that people can try out these new techniques like Ediane and so on. So I think podcasting from an audience perspective is definitely a way of learning, but really from a developmental perspective and creators perspective, it also is quite useful because it's challenging us to find new ways and simplified ways of talking about really complex ideas. It certainly helped me with my own studies.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
You know, quality professional development is such an important part of the teaching industry, but it's surprisingly hard to come by. That's why I was so pleased to come across Learn Your English, a company providing online teacher education courses with a fresh perspective. My name is Erin, and I'm an English language teacher. After a decade in the classroom, I found myself teaching the same things in the same way. My learning seemed to have plateaued. I wanted to take charge of my learning, and I really like how the online Learn Your English courses don't prescribe anything. They motivate me to reflect on my teaching and propose tactics and ideas I hadn't considered. If you're a language teacher wanting to learn inside your busy schedule, I highly recommend their online courses on Thinkific. Head on over to lyenetwork.thinkific.com. That's lyenetwork.thinkific.com. Take control of your education. You won't regret it.
What's up, my people? What's up, everyone? I hope everyone's doing okay. I'm Ian. My name is Ian Salif. I'm from Russia, live in Ecuador in this moment. And you're listening to the Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
So I have a little bit of a reflexive exercise for us, if you're ready. Mike and Leo, do you remember the first episode that we recorded?
2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2019.
Yeah.
We talked
January?
about
February?
No.
We talked about habits. Don't set resolutions. Cultivate habits.
That was number 2.
That was number 2.
That was number 2.
I don't remember number 1 then.
Number 2 was what the podcast is and why we're doing it?
Yes, that was the first one. In Leo's dining room at his house, we all sat around the table. I do remember that. And I think it's the only time we were ever in the same room recording an episode. But
gosh, that's so funny.
I've listened back to it a couple times, and like the audio's no good. We don't sound good. I don't like it very much at all. But I guess that's the point. because over 2 years we've grown, not only with our audio engineering of the show, but as teachers and as practitioners, and we hope the audience has as well. So the reflexive exercise is twofold. One, why did we start the podcast? And two, how have we grown as individuals in the 2 years we've been doing it?
Wow, that's a really difficult question.
So I ask the questions, I don't answer them.
I'm going to link mine to a lot of things, but I'm going to try to keep it brief, I promise. I've always been a huge fan of podcasting, again, because I think it's a different learning modality. And I was talking to Mike about this earlier today, and I wish I had come up with this idea or had come across this idea before I had written my dissertation, which is the John Cleese from Monty Python, who talked about this idea of open mode and closed mode. And he basically said that creativity is not possible when you are in this closed mode. So the closed mode is basically when we are too focused on our to-do lists, when we are in this very deep state of focus, we are working towards a very specific outcome. We have to finish that paper. We have to finish writing this thing. And we're fueled by what they call productive stress. So it's that adrenaline, and you can't really, you're trying to get it done. By contrast, the open mode, according to him, is more relaxed. It's more expansive. It's less purposeful. And because we're more relaxed, we're more contemplative, we're more inclined to humor, and consequently, we're more playful. And it is in this open mode that we're able to really develop, to really grow, to really reflect. And I think for me, podcasting is an example for me growing, or how I have developed with podcasting is I was really able to develop this creative open mode of myself, because I find that a lot of the times I am in the closed mode, which is what another writer calls the coffee mode, because I'm always trying to get it done. I need to do this. I need to finish this. Whereas when I'm in the open mode, which another writer calls it the beer mode, you're more relaxed, you're more playful. And I think podcasting allows for this. And a good example of that would be Alexander Fleming, because apparently when he invented the penicillin, apparently he was in the open mode, because he was just playing around. He wasn't in a focus mode. I don't think he was drunk, but he saw like a Petri dish near an open window, and then he just started playing with it, and it was full of mold. And eventually that's how he came up with the idea for penicillin. So he wasn't really focused on trying to find a cure. And I think the same thing with podcasting. Podcasting has helped me develop in so many ways, in terms of interviewing, in terms of questioning, in terms of furthering my own thoughts, and really adopting what Mike and I talk a lot about in Zen Buddhism, this idea of having a beginner's mindset. Because when I approach podcasting, I'm approaching it from the perspective of the listener. What is it like to not know what you know already? So I'm always trying to otherize myself and think, if a person is listening to this podcast, how can I keep it as simple as possible, as Andrew likes to call it, less inside baseball. Let's not use jargon. Let's keep this conversational. And again, I think it has improved my confidence. It has done a lot. And I think my dissertation was the culmination of all these years of my love for podcasting.
Beautiful.
Yeah, how do I follow that up?
Good luck.
No, listen, Leo's basically, he's said it all without the drama, which is awesome. I thought you were going to make me cry or something there. I think I go back to what I said earlier. I think for me, it's what Leo said. It's this idea of putting yourself in the audience's shoes and thinking, if I was an audience member, what would I like to know? I'm going to be honest with everyone. Leo knows this. Andrew knows this. I was really nervous for my first few episodes recording the podcast. I thought it was something unattainable. And I was quite reluctant at first to take part in interviews, and even still now, I find it a little bit intimidating. But what got me through it was knowing that the show wasn't so much about me or what I knew about the subject, but rather what I felt the audience would like to know. And it was that this duty that Leo's speaking to, right? This duty of my job as the interviewer is to get as much out of this precious 45 minutes or 4 hours that I have with this person, and to hopefully answer the audience's questions. And I think that alone has been my growth. As Leo said, it's the becoming comfortable in your own skin, be comfortable not knowing, and be comfortable asking questions. Because I think a lot of people feel intimidated to ask questions. They feel it might present them in a certain way. And I certainly have felt that for a long time. And I think the podcast has been a real safe space for me to kind of just ask questions and to discover. Yeah. And I think I have to say, I've also learned how much work they are putting together, because Andrew works endlessly on the production side of it and the editing.
Kudos to Andrew. Yeah.
Kudos to Andrew for keeping this going.
I have beer for that too, so it's okay.
Beer mode.
Beer mode.
Beer mode. Yeah. It's not supposed to be 24/7 though, Andrew.
No, not anymore.
What about you, Andrew?
I mean, all of that. I don't want to repeat. I mean, it's the same. But I think for me, apart from learning how to put a show together, like on the engineering side, which is really cool, and I'm a dork, so I'm kind of into that kind of stuff, is that community. And I know, Leo, we're going to get to your research here shortly, and that's one of the factors you talked about is how podcasting builds a community and kind of, it's corny, but brings people together, and globalization and the whole thing. But for me, there's very specific examples of that. And Leo, you were there for both of them, where we went to conferences and we basically just walked up to very well-known people. Paula Winky, one of them. And I almost didn't do it, right? You convinced me to do it. And I said, just ask her. And I said, no, she's a keynote speaker, right? And we just went up and I just asked her, do you want to come on the show? And she said, absolutely. How can I make it happen? And she said yes. And then Mariah said yes. And I can't think of someone who said no. And we have Scott Thornbury coming on next month. And it's not about stature of people per se. It's just that it's a community of people, and it does kind of bring people together. And I think it's a great, not to romanticize the whole thing, but I think it's great. And we're, making people on a very similar plane where we can all learn from each other. And that's been my favorite thing. And I didn't expect that, to be honest, at the beginning.
Go ahead.
Can I chip in here? I think it was Masatoshi Sato who said on his in his episode that if the work we do as a researcher doesn't go out and doesn't reach teachers, then it's useless. And I think that's one of the reasons why at least me and my colleagues, I think, in the field are so eager, probably also to even participate. So and would not say no, because I think one of the biggest frustrations of us, and talking about us as the community of researchers, the SLA researchers, into second language acquisition, is that we have all that research, and it's very hard to see that a lot of teaching, not a lot, but some teaching completely ignores that, and it's not, and I think that's really where you fill a gap, in the sense that you bridge that, because I think the way how we write it up, or which also is another community where we also are expected to write how we write it, is not accessible and not meaningful for teachers. So there's some other initiatives that I'm sure you know about, the Oasis, open accessible summaries of research that is freely available now. But this is another way, to also make sure that people hear about what we've been finding. So I think that's important. And if I may say something else also about the community of practice that you had before, where I think it's the way of being able to reflect on your own teaching practice. I think that's just super important. And even there's research out there that shows that if schools have more money, it would be better to basically give teachers more time to reflect on their practice, to come together and talk about their practice, rather than, for example, making classes smaller. That's often something we say, oh, we have too many pupils, I can't focus on all of them. But there's research that supports that actually if you keep the class size the same, but give teachers more time to talk with each other about their practice, that is more meaningful, has bigger effect.
I feel like Mariah kind of answered the question why we started the
There we go.
podcast.
Sorry,
much so.
We can't do
we
it.
forgot.
Yeah.
We forgot
No, that's
to
great.
answer
Yeah,
that
yeah.
question. We didn't answer that question. We didn't answer that question.
If
But I
that's
don't think we didn't have anything in mind when we started this podcast, did we? We didn't have like a very specific aim. We're going to create, I think as Mike said, when we created the podcast, we just really wanted to be able to talk about the things that we are learning.
I don't even think we thought of it as an interview show. I think we just thought we would talk about things we thought people wanted to talk about. But then it turned into, well, now there's a guest, and now there's another one. Now there's another person who is interested in participating. And like everything in life, it just evolves and turns into what it is. And this is the iteration that it is now. I'm sure there'll be another one 12 months from now.
Yeah, you're right, Andrew. It eventually became an interview podcast. Long form interviews, because I remember Mark Jones saying like, well, the podcasts are quite long.
Yes.
Well, but that's the whole point, right? We don't want, we find that you can't really have a deep conversation and really get something out of a 20-minute conversation. I'm sorry, but our podcasts are aimed to be 90 minutes. And as Mike said, most of the time we were very nervous. And just a side note, I remember reading Mariah's papers in the past. And when I saw her at the conference, I said, oh, Andrew, Mariah Michelle is here. Maybe we should go talk to her. And eventually she was having she was buying some sort of coffee and a donut
Double-double or
a
something,
bagel, a double at a Tim Hortons in Ottawa. And that's when I kind of approached her and I talked to her. And then eventually we've developed a friendship and she came on the show. But it's great because, as you said, we met a lot of people. I remember when I was interviewing Susan Hunston, I couldn't sleep at night because I kept thinking, I was like, I read all her papers. I know everything about this woman. And I was so nervous before that. But eventually, once you start the conversation, you realize that these are just human beings.
Exactly.
Anyway.
As we kind of move on here a little bit, because we will be here for 4 hours if we don't move on. But that's very interesting, Mariah, about the funding or allocation of funding in terms of that, because that is really interesting. We've heard lots of feedback on our show and teachers saying that they congregate and they do meet voluntarily with their colleagues to talk about not just what they hear on our show, but on other great ELT podcasts as well. So that sounds very interesting, and we can link it if it is open source. That would be very cool. I know, Leo, you wanted to talk about just right before we get to your research, because podcasting as a development tool, sure, but we can also use podcasting as an assessment tool. Mm-hmm. And I thought we could touch on that briefly, because it, as we've experienced, and I'm sure lots of others have, it's more than just what it sounds like. And we have a new project coming up with Carleton University in Canada, where we met Mariah and lots of other people, and Paula Winke as well, to work with their MA program on podcasting and using podcasting as an assessment in their field. But Mike and Leo, you are better to talk about this than I am. How can teachers use podcasting as an assessment?
Well, I think Mike and I can talk about this, but Mariah can also mention this because she's used our podcast in her MA program. But one of the things that I did last year was I was teaching an EAP class, and I basically encouraged my students to, instead of doing another academic presentation, I said I would like everyone to actually choose a research paper. I think I asked them to choose a research paper from the conversation, which I was introduced to by Mariah. And I said, pick an article that you like from the conversation. We scaffolded the entire assessment into first, you're going to read the paper. You have to,
which is a website with articles.
Yes. Mostly, I think you have research from Canada, the US, New Zealand, UK, Spain, all parts of the world. And what is interesting is that by having the students actually create their own podcast, it has something that Mike can actually talk a little bit more about, which is this developing this sense of agency and, very important, investment. They are definitely more invested in the task because they are the ones who are going to be producing. And I think this engagement, this development of critical, something that the TOEFLology people talk a lot about, this development of critical co-presentership, which I've developed with you guys, this stimulus for autonomy. It's something that we really need to be doing more in education as opposed to tests. I think podcasting really gives us an opportunity to look at different types of transferable skills that I think students are going to need in the future. The ability to interview someone, the ability to read a research paper, to summarize that, to come up with questions, and then host an episode live for 10 minutes. That's not easy. That's more difficult than having to memorize a bunch of information that you're never going to use in your life and then just regurgitate that on a piece of paper for your prof. Right? Mike, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you've said. I haven't used it as a tool in my own classroom, but I've experienced it as a student. And I think that it's very helpful, especially for graduate students who are conducting their own research and thinking in long term about how they're going to eventually talk about their research, both as Dr. Michelle said, both formally and published journal articles or periodicals, or informally, quote unquote, informally through conference presentations or modes such as mediums such as podcasting. But the project that I experienced firsthand was kind of tied into what we have run in Canada, which is called the 3-minute thesis competition. And part of that is for you to articulate the main points of your thesis or dissertation in under 3 minutes in a way that captivates your audience and kind of demonstrates your own command of the knowledge, but also your ability to show, as Leo and I like to say, some sort of emotional connection to the content. And so in preparation for that, one of our professional seminar courses that I was enrolled in had a podcast activity where we needed to talk about our dissertation or our upcoming projects in 6 to 8 minutes in a way that incorporated all of the kind of different bells and whistles of podcasting that Andrew likes to add. So the production side of it, as well as what I said earlier and what Leo was talking about earlier, putting it in a way that's easily digestible and understandable to the audience. And I think what came out of that was not only was I able to kind of create this 3-minute thesis, this very even more narrow format of my dissertation, but it really helped me with things like proposal writing and grant writing, because I was used to writing not only for myself or my committee, but also for a general person or administrator who might be looking at proposals and grants dealing with a wide range of disciplines, right? So I think that as a student, it really gives you an opportunity to let those ideas and beliefs crystallize in your own mind, and then you can feel a little bit more comfortable talking to people, more confident talking to people about your own research, your own interests. And again, because podcast, the mode itself provides all kinds of cool opportunities for adding sound effects and other types of media, you can really personalize it. You can really attach all kinds of different symbols and metaphors in a way that you couldn't do if you were publishing it. You couldn't provide lots of metaphors and different types of slang and expressions. So for me, it really, I think to summarize, I think it really helps kind of flatten the divide, right? Like it's taking it, it's removing that hierarchy. It's making it more simplified so that we're all kind of speaking at the same level about the same topic. And it's been really helpful for me in my PhD studies.
And that sentiment, I think, is why a lot of professors are starting to incorporate that type of idea into their classes. And when a professor at Carleton approached us to ask us if we would be interested in participating in a project like that, I mean, the same idea was in her mind, because she wanted her MA students to actually talk to the scholars that they'd be reading or are on the reading list for the class. And now they're doing that, which, I mean, sounds like a really cool idea. And I wish that I had the opportunity to do that during a course when I was in school. To actually interview and talk to someone on your reading list would be invaluable, I think. So we're excited for that project and excited for the students, because I think that will be a really cool experience.
Mariah actually did something similar, Andrew, and maybe she can talk a little bit about that assessment, because I'm very curious, because she sent me the course syllabus, and well, maybe you can just tell us more about it, Mariah.
Yeah, so I'm teaching this class on teaching methodologies, second language teaching methodologies within our MA program Applied Linguistics. We have at Groningen University in the Netherlands. And I think I mentioned before, it's quite an international crowd. So we do not only have Dutch students, but they really come from everywhere, from Chile to China, basically. And the first part of that course is quite theoretical. So they read a lot about statistical learning, for example, or about implicit and explicit learning. So quite heavy stuff in that sense. And the second part is that I'm teaching, and I try to bring it more into practice. So to give them much more hands-on activities, I take a very strong task-based approach to that course. So we do a lot of TBLT. We used to work together with a CLIL school, so content and language integrated school, where the students would then actually go off to teach also one lesson. So they would design a lesson plan and then would have the possibility to go and teach there, which this year wasn't possible because schools would not let us in.
Right.
But to engage them with different ways of research. I basically so I had those different topics per class. So week by week you talk about. I always said I talked about assessment, where I use Paula Winke's class. I have this one lesson where I have the Willis and Willis 1996 paper, where she explains basically what's a pre-task, what's a task, what's the post-task. And in that episode, I also let him listen to the Jane and Willis interview you've had, the Jane Willis interview. And I have a class where we talk about what we call individual differences. So typically something like language learning motivation, but also anxiety. So there I had them listen to Masatoshi Sato's podcast. So basically for every class, I give them an episode, and sometimes it's on a voluntary base. So just say, okay, if this really catches your interest, why don't you go on and listen to a bit more? And at times I included in that sense in the assessment that I asked them to write a review, or say, okay, so when you've read that paper, you've listened to the podcast, so now write a synthesis of it, which is a very academic task, because quite often you have to read a paper, listen to the lecture, and then write a paper about that. So so this is a typical academic synthesis task in that sense. And in my language classes, because I also teach German as a second or as a foreign language. So I do teach German classes, and quite often there I ask my students also to listen to, I don't know, radio episodes, and they listen to patches of radio. They need to find a paper on the same content, and then they have to write a review of that. But sometimes we also ask them to create vlogs or podcasts as a response to that. So I think we would need to take a class with Andrew on how to do high-level podcasts in the technical perspective as well. But some of the students are amazing. They put in those jingles, and they have music, and they fades out in and out.
It's not as hard as you think it is.
No. But I mean, one of the things that I actually also noticed as a teacher, what is nice that you, especially in language classes, you need enough language samples to evaluate how good your students are. So when it comes to assessment. Now, and I think we've all been in those classes with hours and hours of presentations of our fellow students that would just never end. Now, what you can do with podcasts is that students have to record the podcast, and then you as a teacher, you have enough language sample to listen to. And you divide the podcasts over class and say, okay, each student has to listen to 3 of them, of their peers, and give some feedback on that. So it's also a way of dividing the work and also in making learning more individualized, because students can pick the topics of the podcast they want to listen to. And it's, yeah, so I think it really opens a lot of opportunities for assessment, especially if you also have larger classes, larger groups, and you can do group podcasts. You have a group podcast basically, so yeah, you can ask them to work together, and yeah, I think it just opens a lot of opportunities from all different sides.
And it sounds like that the students are, as Leo said, they're demonstrating a lot of investment in this activity, right? They're taking ownership over it. They're adding the jingles, and it's, hey, listen, I'll tell you firsthand, like knowing what jingle goes with the definition of intercultural communicative competence is really, it makes you think deeply about, what you want to project and what you want to say.
Beer mode.
Yeah.
What is that jingle?
Yeah, I'm also interested, Michael. What's the jingle for intercultural communicative competence?
I couldn't think of one, so I actually changed the metaphor, and it was a blowing leaf. And then I had leaves blowing in the wind.
So that's good.
Because one has to go with the wind, right?
What's interesting,
thanks for asking, though.
Just before we jump into the research, but just to add to that, to what Mariah was saying and what Mike just said, my students actually went beyond what I had actually asked them to do. I asked them only to choose the paper that they want to research, prepare the script, not a script, but like an outline of the podcast, find out who is going to be the person hosting and the other two who are going to be talking. And then eventually at the end, the other students were actually asking questions. So I decided to incorporate that as part of the assessment, because everyone was genuinely interested in the articles. And as you said, Mariah, I had lots of students who actually chose interesting articles based on psychology, because that was their major. I had students who chose papers based on engineering, students who chose papers based on business. So it was actually very easy to group these students because they were based on their own interest. And one of the things that I wanted to add is I had a group of students who actually had, because they were doing the podcasts live, and I wanted to see it live because I wanted to add an element of difficulty and complexity to it. But I had a group of students who actually had claps. They had all the sound effects prepared beforehand, even though I didn't ask for that. So I think that's the beauty of it, is because they felt like it was theirs. And I think with education, when you feel like something belongs to you and you have complete ownership over the entire process, I think you become more invested in that.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Developing as a teacher isn't easy. It's even more challenging doing it solo. If you are looking to join a passionate community of teachers who love to learn, then the Learn Your English teaching membership can help. The Learn Your English membership allows teachers to develop what they want when they want to, through monthly challenges, webinars, reflection tasks, and application to your individual teaching context. The membership brings like-minded people together from all around the world. If you love improving and taking risks in education, then join their growing community of teaching professionals today. Find out how at learnyourenglish.net/memberships.
Hi everyone, my name is Carrie and I'm from Macau. This is Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast. 大家好，我個名係劉依慈，我嚟自澳門，你而家聽緊嘅係 Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
And I think with education, when you feel like something belongs to you and you have complete ownership over the entire process, I think you become more invested in that.
Speaking of investment, Leo, you spent about 12 years, not just joking, writing a dissertation for investment in podcasting.
Well, all of you are here.
That's
Mike
so
is
rude.
here.
That's
Andrew's here. Mariah
something's
is
gonna
here.
happen to you. You're gonna slip on some ice today, Andrew.
You were all part of it.
No, I can't go outside, so no.
You were all part of this. You were all part of this. Mariah was every day pushing me to get into the coffee mode, into the close mode, just write every day. And then some days I would go into the beer mode, the open mode, and just read and think. But one of the things I wanted to say about the dissertation and the thesis is it was a piece of advice from Michael a long time ago. And I told him this earlier in our conversation today, that when I was about to write my thesis, I didn't know what to write about. I wanted to write about task-based language teaching, but then again, there are so many papers published on task-based language teaching. I thought about lexical approach. I thought about pattern grammar. I thought about a bunch of different things, but there were already a lot of other research on those areas. So I said, what is something that I really care about, that I'm passionate about, that I could actually be more invested in? And that's when I decided to choose podcasting. And Mariah actually helped me with piloting the interview questions. I remember that we did the interview questions together, and she said, oh, this question is not good, this one is good, change this, change that. And eventually I spent 6 months of my life alternating between beer mode and coffee mode. But I was very happy with the overall result. And just to talk a little bit about this, the question was exactly what you said, Andrew. How do teachers perceive the use of ELT podcasts? And again, there were three sub questions. What factors contribute to teachers taking the decision to listen to those podcasts? What are some of the benefits of using podcasts as a tool for professional development and personal development? And the third question was something that I was genuinely interested in, which is, can podcasts be incorporated in pre and in-service teacher training courses? And if so, how? And eventually I interviewed about 20 people, and the findings are here. We can talk a little bit about the findings.
Let's do it.
But I feel like we've already touched on all of them throughout this episode, but I'll just talk about a few things. One of them was the factors that contribute. Social media, right? People who use Twitter eventually will find out about the podcast. People who are on Instagram or Facebook will eventually find out about the podcast. Another impetus to listen to podcasts was the fact that people were learning from these prominent ELT figures, right? So many of the podcasts that we have out there, they're hosting very prominent ELT educators and renowned researchers, such as Mariah here with us. And I remember one guy said in the interview, he said, the big name celebrity is really important. I'll never forget that. Oh, if there's a big name, I'm going to listen to it. So, and there was one teacher who said that they doesn't have money to attend conferences because the school doesn't provide for professional development. So for him, podcasting was another way of
I was just going to ask you a question about your research question. What motivates teachers to listen to podcasts as a form of development in place of another form, or as their only means of developing?
I didn't get to that part.
Okay.
I didn't investigate that, but that's a good question.
Okay.
It's a good
That might
question.
be a good poll for the Instagram account.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So a teacher that does
question.
nothing to develop and then starts listening to podcasts, for example, which I'm sure it's the most accessible way to do it, or the example that you just gave, Leo, where a development plan that requires some kind of financial investment that may be feasible, may not be feasible, whereas podcasting requires time investment, but nothing financial.
Yeah. Well, I think I remember one of the respondents said that you don't get the chance to see the people who are leaders in the field. Like, for example, a teacher who works at a public school in Mexico probably can't really afford to go to the UK to attend an ITAFL conference, or to go to Europe to attend an SLA conference, but they have an opportunity to actually listen to, Michael Long, or they have an opportunity to listen to Masatoshi Sato, even though they're never going to be able to attend the conference. And if you think about this, the conference, they only present for 25 minutes, whereas the podcast, you're listening to them talking about the research for about an hour and a half, if they're listening to our show, of course. Other shows are shorter, and I respect that. But also availability, right? It's very flexible. That's another point that I wanted to emphasize, is that the fact that it's portable, it's on your phone, that really it removes friction for development. You cannot say that you don't have time to develop, because all you have to do is open your Spotify and click, or Apple Podcasts, whatever you use, and then you can listen to it. Another thing that was interesting that I found was the idea of different learning modalities, but we've already talked about this. But one respondent said that because he suffers from ADHD, he said that reading a journal article was really, really hard for him. So he said that podcasts really helped him maintain focus because they're bite-sized and kind of matches his attention span sometimes. So that was an interesting finding. In terms of benefits, a lot of interesting things. Again, exposure to new perspectives, as we've already talked about this. And Andrew, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, because we interviewed Jason Anderson, who goes against everything that we believe in terms of language teaching, and he's a strong proponent of PPP. And you said at some point that you found yourself kind of like agreeing with him throughout the interview, even though you don't agree with some of his. And Mariah is nodding her head, and she's probably.
I think that's just the nature of conversation, isn't it? Like when you talk to somebody about something and you're actually genuinely engaged in talking to them and not trying to find a point of like, aha, I got you. Not trying to have that Twitter moment. If you're actually listening and actually engaging, then yeah, Jason's a smarter person than I'll ever be, and he's well read and well researched, and doesn't have his opinions because he just made it up. So I think you can talk to anybody and really find points of agreement, even if, in this case, the broad approach that we take is different. But I think he has a lot of points that I think people should listen to. And if you haven't listened to his episode, you should go back and do so, because, I know we don't, as a company, as a podcast, don't agree in broad strokes, and this is black and white. There's so much nuance, and there's so much gray area. And to say that you should always do this or always do that, I don't think that's a very constructive approach to life, and not to teaching either. So, and I hope that we have a show that's balanced. I like to think that we do, and that to have a balanced show doesn't mean you just invite people on that will say, yeah, you're right. We want people to challenge our views as well. So Jason did a really good job of doing that.
A good example of that was Brett Reynolds, who is against teaching collocations as well. So as you said, Andrew, we're constantly trying to bring people on the show whose views are somewhat different from our own, because that's the beauty of podcast. You don't really have to agree, but I find that when you have a conversation with someone whose views are completely different from yours, you actually end up learning a lot more.
Well, here's a question that you like to say, Leo, all the time. It's from the Socratic method, right? Have you ever considered the possibility that you are wrong? And if we have the notion of, I'm going to have someone on the show that doesn't have the same view as me. Well, the first starting point for me when I did that episode is that maybe I'm wrong. And let's go into the episode and with an open mind, and let's listen. And we'll do that with every guest in every episode we do that, go forward with the same kind of idea. But I think if you go in trying to, I don't know what the word is, but like cement what you already think, it's not really the nature of a long form discussion based podcast, right?
Yeah, and I think
yeah, go Mike.
Certainly, you know my stance. I always take an appreciative approach. So I'd go the opposite, Andrew. I'd say maybe you're both right. There are multiple truths, and in multiple different situations in which A is going to be a much more feasible option than B, and vice versa. And it's quite interesting that we as scholar practitioners are very free and open about how interdisciplinary language acquisition is, additional language acquisition is. Yet when it comes to how we do it, we're very narrow, right? Oh, this approach is better than that approach. So that's why I would just say that yeah, maybe we're both right. So let's just find out these different reasons in terms of how one might be more advantageous than another. And then we can get along rather than win arguments, which I think on different platforms, it's come down to winning of arguments rather than just sharing of knowledge and ideas. So hopefully that's been reflected in the podcast. And And that's certainly a direction we definitely want to go.
Absolutely. Just going back here into some of the ideas. Another one is what you just said, Mike, broadening your educational horizon. I think being exposed to different ideas, being challenged. I myself found myself throughout many interviews being challenged, even as I was listening to the episode with Jason Anderson. I found myself, oh, actually, this does make a little bit of sense. But what I really liked about that is what Andrew mentioned is like, what is the other side of the argument? How can I be less wrong? Because we're always focusing on being right. But one of the things I've been trying to do myself is I start with the presupposition that I'm wrong, and I'm trying to be less wrong in everything that I do. And a couple of other things that people will mention, it's the benefits. It's a platform for self-directed, bottom-up in the wild CPD. A lot of teachers mentioning that it's very different from the kinds of top-down CPD that most schools would offer, because as you said, Andrew, and this is actually Andrew's quote here, it offers more agency because you can actually choose which episode you want to listen to, as opposed to, oh, I want to, I'm going to do a PD today on grammar, but you're not really interested. You're not really invested in that. But with podcasting, you actually can choose what you want to learn more about. What else? Opportunities for engaging in reflective practice, critical thinking. And one of the teachers mentioned this idea of being engaged and interacting with the ideas presented. And he actually said that there was actually space for me as a listener to kind of agree or just say, that's crap, I don't believe in that. But it's the reflection, right? It's this you're actually using that open mode to reflect on the ideas that are reverberating through your mind. And not to mention, of course, podcasts really foster critical thinking, because you always have these light bulb moments, right? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Developing a community of practice. Yeah, go ahead.
Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any recommendations other than the obvious of, listen to podcasts? But is there something deeper? I don't know.
From what?
From your conclusions. So what would you recommend if I'm a teacher who I've never listened to a podcast for developing? And I guess this goes into if I want to use it in my classrooms too, because we ran a session almost a year ago called Pedagogy Before Technology. So podcasting falls into the technology category. So podcasting in and of itself isn't necessarily a great tool. It's kind of what we do with it, right? So how would you recommend teachers use a podcast that they like for their developmental purposes?
That's a good question. I'm going to use different podcasts. I'm going to talk about a different podcast. Very recently, I listened to Tim Ferriss' podcast where he interviewed Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know how many of you know who Jerry Seinfeld is, but he was a very successful comedian. It still is, I guess, in North America. And he had a show back in the 90s, Seinfeld. I think we're all big fans of that show.
Big time.
But as I was listening to that episode, what Tim Ferriss was doing with Jerry Seinfeld is they were having a very nonchalant conversation, and they were basically they were trying to deconstruct how Jerry thinks or how he approaches the creation of jokes, his writing. And I use a lot of, to answer your question, Andrew, I approach podcasting as a way of learning new ideas, applying those ideas to my life, finding out what works and what doesn't work. And I spend a lot of time writing down at least 2 to 3 takeaways from each episode that I listen to, because I find that knowledge without action is really a waste of time. If you just consume information, but you don't really apply what you're learning, I don't see how you can actually develop. So to answer to your question, that's what I think teachers could do when they're listening to a podcast. And I think Mariah did this with one of her students, because I remember, I don't know if she was trying to punish her student, but she asked him to listen to an episode with Mike Long, and she asked the student to write a transcription of the entire episode.
Oh my God. The long version.
The Mike long version.
Now that's a task. Wow.
The
Okay.
long version. Did I don't think I wanted the whole transcription, did I? Maybe because the person had really missed a lot of classes.
Yes.
Like kind of.
I don't think you asked him. I think he felt bad that he missed. Yes, he felt bad that he missed some
classes. This brings me to an idea. No, but actually, I mean, I did use that episode. It's the is it from CLB Barcelona?
SLB, yeah.
SLB, and it's what I did ask them. So it was integrated for all students, but not all of them had to transcribe it. But they had to read a paper by Mike Long, and Mike Long is quite. He's always. I think he's also proud of that. At least how I met him. Of he's making strong points. So he's not afraid of making strong points. So he also, because he really wants to trigger a reaction. And that's also what I saw actually. So I asked students, okay, so you've been reading Mike Long, so now you've been listening to him. And again, there was a synthesis task in that sense. And it was interesting what students brought back from that as well, in the sense that what episodes they liked and what statements they liked and what they found difficult. To also, I mean, sometimes can also be difficult to listen to. So if you really don't agree, or if you think it's not what I want or what I would say.
What I remember from that episode, and it was from the SLB podcast, and we'll shout out other ELT podcasts that we like before we're done here. But I remember the interviewer asking Mike Long in that episode where teachers who are interested in TBLT materials could go to find TBLT materials. And his answer was basically something like, well, that wouldn't exist if they're actually TBLT materials.
No, but that's, because he really just said, you know, because it's always based on the needs of your immediate students you have here in this classroom. So, I find it interesting because I have a lot of, whenever I do teacher trainings also on task-based language teaching, questions say, so where do I find the book? So can I have a book on a real task-based book? And I'd agree with Mike Long that doesn't exist. And if it exists, it shouldn't.
But a very provocative response, right? So yes, bang on there. All right. Leo, anything else to add with the research? I find it fascinating because it's a topic that I haven't. I'm sure, Mike, you're the same. I hadn't heard of somebody looking into before, and it's a great, 2021 or 2020 topic because it's moving the industry forward, which I think is always a really good thing.
I think one of the things that I found fascinating was rereading my paper after so long.
Okay.
I was like, oh, wow. I didn't know I had written that. I was like, oh, but it's funny to see how I've actually evolved from when I wrote that paper. And I was like, okay, I don't feel that way about that anymore, which is a good thing because it means I have developed. But what I wanted to say, I think the conclusion is very simple, is that I think we need more studies. I think we need, one of the things I remember talking to my advisor about is perhaps we need to create more protocols where we have maybe groups of teachers. And I think we do this a lot in our teacher membership, where we try to link all of our challenges to the current podcast that we release. So for an example of that would be our November episode podcast, where we asked everyone to read an introduction to Dogme ELT. And the interview that month was actually Luke Meddings talking about Dogme ELT. So we had a chance to introduce the challenge. We took a vow of chastity. Every teacher who was in our membership said that they were going to teach a lesson without preparing, and they would just naturally react to their students' needs. And eventually we got back together at the end of the month to talk about how the experience went. And I think that is the power of podcasting. That is the power that podcasting provides, because it creates this community of practice that Mike can speak more about in a second. But I think that's the beauty of podcasting. It provides an alternative to this very transmissive top-down model of education where people are being lectured at, talked at, as opposed to podcasting where it gives even people who are attending this podcast here. I feel like I don't know you, but when I'm listening to a podcast, I feel like I'm part of the conversation. I was listening to Tim Ferriss and Jerry Seinfeld. I felt like I was in the conversation because I was laughing with them. And I think that's the beauty. It's this intimacy that podcast, especially long form podcast, creates.
Yeah, and just to wrap up what you just said, it's this kind of shared community that emerges from it, right? In terms of our membership, we unite around the podcast episode, and then we set some sort of task that helps us to actualize our knowledge or to kind of practice what we've just learned, and we do it in the supportive environment with critical friends, critical peers who give honest feedback and oftentimes very supportive feedback that leads to even further growth. So I think it's quite interesting what you just said, which was that you feel like you're an active member in that dialogue. I think that it goes back to what Deepika said earlier, which was that you're even in your own mind, you're taking part in that, right? And you're getting your own ideas from there. It's in the membership that you get to then test out those ideas and to share those reflections.
And if you'll bear with me here, before we kind of conclude this episode, we did send out a request for people to join us today, which a lot of you have, and also if you were unable to send in an audio sample on exactly what, Mike, you were just talking about, of how podcasting helps you, and if you're a teacher, and when you do a show, sometimes you don't get to hear from the people who listen. So in this case, if you'll bear with me, some of them are a little bit long, but I think that's a good thing. So the first one is from our friend Mark Jones.
Hello, this is Mark Jones, and I've been a long-time listener of Teacher Talking Time podcast. And podcasts have actually played quite an important part of my continuing professional development. One of the main reasons is that you can kind of do it whenever you don't have time, which sounds kind of strange, but you have to make a concerted effort to actually get into reading a book or an article. And when I say article, I don't mean a research article. It can even be quite a long blog post or something like that, or even something from a teacher's magazine. You need to kind of have a bit of time available to you to do that. But with podcasts, I can listen while I do the washing up, or while I'm cleaning the house, or obviously while commuting or something like that. The time when your brain isn't really occupied by anything of great importance. So it kind of occupies my time, and it means I feel a bit more productive or interested in things that I wouldn't normally be interested in, such as cleaning and things. So the ways that podcasts have really helped me is that I get to use other people's networks of contacts to build on my knowledge. So with Teacher Talking Time, I've had the great privilege to listen to episodes featuring people like Mariah Michelle, Vinicius Nobre, and other people like that I just don't know personally and couldn't just email out of the blue to listen to. And also with people like Teflology, I was a listener to them first, and then I got to know them. Later appeared on the podcast as well, and appeared on the Teacher Talking Time podcast with Chiara Bruzzano, and it was great. You kind of get to realize what you know and what you need to refine in your knowledge when you're talking to somebody else about something that you care quite strongly about. Sometimes the things make sense in your own head, but when you're trying to communicate them to other people, not always. So I'd like to say, so happy kind of second birthday to Teacher Talking Time. And let's hope that you have many, many more episodes to come. Cheers.
Okay, so there's Mark with his, Mark's great, and he was on our show, and it's funny, the 3 exact times and places that we said we listened to the podcast.
Yeah, there's some real saturation occurring there, isn't there? Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead here. And we have Karen next, who's a listener who lives, I should say Mark lives in Japan, I want to say. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he lives in Japan. And Karen is a listener from who lives in Mexico.
Hi there, I'm Karen Ruiz, an English teacher in Mexico City. Why do I love the Learn Your English podcast? In a nutshell, it provides high-quality professional development opportunities to teachers. To me, the Learn Your English podcast is my number one on-the-go professional development tool. I usually listen to the podcast, make notes, and implement what I learned in my daily teaching. I also encourage my colleagues to listen to you, and sometimes we gather to discuss what we learned from the interviews. Instead of having a book club, we have a podcast club, where we discuss and reflect on all the insights and teachings gathered from the Learn Your English podcast. I'm always looking forward to listening to new episodes. It has allowed me to learn from top-notch teacher trainers, authors, and educators. Leo, Mike, and Andrew, you are such an inspiration. Thank you for this excellent podcast and all the commitment and effort you have put into it. You are definitely making a change in the field of English language teaching.
All right, so there's Karen.
That's nice. Yeah, real kind of evidence of the community of practice.
Brought me to tears.
Emerging there.
I was going to say, Leo, you okay?
Yeah, she kind of brought me to tears here. Seriously. It goes back to what Mariah said, right? Just to interrupt you before we listen to the last one. Like, what's the point of research? What's the point of doing what we're doing if we're not giving back? Right? I think as educators, I think as teachers, we need to always find ways to give back. And I think that's one of the reasons why everyone here is still in education. We're not in it for the income. We're in it for the outcome. Right?
Well said. Well said. Clip number 3, there are 4 of them. So clip number 3 comes from our friend Cherry, who lives in India.
I need to continuously innovate and upgrade my skills. At the same time, with my classes moving online, I find myself busier than ever before, with no time or space to do this. That's where podcasts come to my aid. I can listen to them while doing other stuff. The variety of topics discussed in the podcast keeps me on top of my game. Secondly, listening to podcasts helps me beat the feeling of professional isolation. These recorded conversations by regular and guest voices fill my professional lounge with wonderful ideas and help me stay connected. Finally, I wonder what shape my professional development could have taken without me listening to podcasts. Thank you.
Wow. I'm impressed. I haven't listened to any of these.
That's the point. Yeah. So another, it's nice to hear how people listen, when, where, and how it's useful to them, if it is, of course. But not everyone who listens to our show or any show are teachers. So Ediane was nice enough to send in an audio clip from one of her students who uses our Cult of Learning series or Ediane encourages him to use our Cult of Learning series for language learning purposes. So let's hear just a short part of that one.
Hello, my name is Jefferson Pierre. I'm Brazilian and I study English with teacher Ediane for almost 2 years. She told us about Teacher Talking Time podcasts on last year, and after this, frequently I use it to help to improve my English skills and learn a little bit more. A specific episode that helped me a lot was Mastering the Art of Conversation. This episode teaches about the 4 A's, a strategy for encourage to keep the conversation going on and lost a bit of the fear to talk. Basically, the 4 A's are: the first one is ask, the second and the third A's works together and are answer and add more details or information. The last one is ask again. But the most important of this is the third A, add. They tell us to avoid using short answers in our conversation. Always we need to add more details in our answers to keep the conversation. With these tips, always I try to use in my class to develop my conversation and help my classmates to improve too. So, in my opinion, this kind of podcasts are very good to improve, and we can listen when we are going to work, going to the school, or in free time. I recommended it for all the English learners. Thanks.
So there we go. There's another one. Free time, commuting.
Wow.
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Who mentioned that same episode earlier? The 4 A's, the conversation. That's the second time we've heard it today. So
Deepka, yeah.
That's right. That's right. So evidently that's a very good one. Bear with me. We have one more, because not only did Ediane send in a student clip, but she made a recording herself, and now you get to listen to your own voice. So here we go.
Hello everyone, I'm Ediane. Today, Teacher Talking Time podcast is turning 2. I'm at a loss to express how incredible this podcast is. As an English teacher, the podcasts have helped me to look at education from a different perspective. Not only that, but I've also had lots of opportunities to boost my vocabulary. As a matter of fact, I have also been benefited personally from listening to these podcasts. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for the amazing job that you have been doing.
Thank you, Ediane. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful for you to say.
Wow.
It's nice to. It's great to hear. It's wonderful. Leo's getting emotional.
I think I am. I think that answers the question that Mariah kind of answered, and you posed this question at the beginning of the episode, like, why are we doing this? I think that's the answer right there. It's to really help people in communities where they don't have access to professional development, teachers who don't even know how to develop, because for some reason we're still looking at education from a very old, traditional. We're in the 21st century and we're still using a curriculum that is from the 18th century, teaching using methods from the 19th century. I think that's basically it. I think that's the answer to the question why we're doing this. I think the reason why we're doing this is because we want to be able to reach out to as many people as we can. We want to be able to help as many people as we can. And we just wanted to thank you all for your support, for listening, for participating, for sending in your audios. And yeah, I'll stop here. Otherwise, I'm going to start crying live.
That's okay. I think that's
great.
No,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah. I think we're all feeling it. Definitely. Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah. That was a great summary, Leo. Yeah. Just thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all, and thank you for listening. And it's been 2 years. It's kind of crazy, and hopefully we'll do this again in a year or another 2 years. But I know, Leo, we wanted to shout out other podcasts that we like within ELT, because that's important. There are a lot of other good ones if you're unaware. So Topology was one that is an inspiration for us. They have been around, I want to say 10 years. Don't quote me on that, but
no, I think it's less, but they've been around for a long time. And I think Matthew was kind enough to actually share a lot of his work with me. We had a couple of conversations about podcasting. Eventually, we want to do a crossover podcast with them. So two different podcasts getting together to talk about podcasting. I think that's one that we really like. The SLB
podcast is wonderful, right? Out of Barcelona. We'll link all of these in the show notes, so directly to their website, so check them out. And one that I listened to before we started ours, and just kind of as I was developing, was the TEFL Commute. That was a really good one that I liked. And TEFL Training Institute has a nice podcast as well. So those are the 4 that I guess influenced us, and there are other ones as well.
What I was going to say about the TEFL Training Institute, it's a great podcast because it's like 15 minutes. That's great. It's like 15 minutes. It's like a sound bite.
Exactly. You can do it. If you have 15 minutes, this is what you can do. It's perfect.
Mariah said that there's another one. Mariah, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, it's I just put it here in the chat so people can't see it who listen. Sorry for that. But Glenn Fulcher has a really nice one on language assessment. It's called the Language Testing Bites. And it's just 20 minutes, but it's really nice. And it's his website on language assessment is super accessible anyway, and gives you a lot of inspiration, I think, as well. But yeah, I like him. And I think he's also doing it already quite a while. So at least like 6 years or so, maybe longer.
Wow, beautiful.
Really nice. Just 20 minutes.
We will add that to the list, yeah.
We should invite him to come on the podcast, too.
Absolutely.
You should.
Yes, we're going to get him for sure.
There's a rule of 7 in podcasting that I've heard. And I think, Leon, like I said this to you at the beginning, I think lots of people start podcasts, but the rule of 7, a lot of people don't get past 7 episodes. If you get past 7 episodes, you're going to kind of be in it for the long haul. So those ones that we just listed, TEFLology, TEFL Training Institute, SLB Podcast, TEFL Commute, Language Testing Bites, all surpassed that number and are still going, of course. So 7 seems to be the magic number.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I don't have anything else to say.
I think that's a good way to end this episode.
Wonderful. So thank you for listening. Happy New Year. Happy 2021 or 2021, however you're saying it. And I heard the internet is saying don't say 2021 because it sounds like 2020, WON, 2021.
Oh my gosh.
So that's a dad joke from the internet, I guess. But Happy New Year regardless.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, it was great.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Teacher Talking Time, brought to you by Learn Your English. Ready to take control of your education? You're in the right place. Teaching, professional development, learning. Expand your world with Learn Your English.